Hi everyone, it's Shara, and I hope that you really enjoyed all of your sessions at Region 9 this morning, and hopefully you learned something that you can apply this afternoon when you're meeting with your grade level teams. I just wanted to make a quick video to go over what I would like for you to complete this afternoon with the help of your teammates. I would like every teacher to complete this, even if you do work in, let's say in this case, this is a 6th grade reading plan of action, but I would like all the teachers to complete it. That way you have your own copy and you can follow through with it in your classroom when you're doing your planning. So I want to go over the instructions and just talk a little bit about what I would like you to discuss, even though I'm not trying to limit what you can discuss, but I would like this to be at the forefront because it is a day for planning and collaboration. So I'm just going to go over the instructions that are at the top of this document. You will be able to find this document in Google Classroom, depending on your grade level. So if you are indeed a 6th grade reading teacher, you will go to the 6th grade Google Classroom where you can locate this document. So here's what I want you to think about. Based on student performance in your class so far this school year, what lessons do your students need to prepare for the district benchmark? So as you can see, this calendar goes all the way from tomorrow, the 17th, through the 8th, which is our district benchmark. So that's kind of the time frame that I want us to look at. Obviously, we need to plan for the whole semester, and you can obviously go beyond just the benchmark date, but I really want us to focus for the next couple of weeks on what we really need to focus on. So that could be different for each teacher. So I want you to collaborate with other teachers on your grade level team and determine what your students need, which may not be what's already in the curriculum. You know, we do have a planning calendar that tells you, which unit you're supposed to be focusing on, but we're really trying to prepare for that benchmark so that we can get an accurate picture of where our students are. So from the first semester, what do you kind of think about where your students are? Hey, are they struggling with poetry? Are they struggling with fiction? Are they struggling with expository text? What have they really had trouble with? Have they had trouble with vocabulary questions? What has kind of been your assessment of them so far this year in terms of what they really need some extra instruction on? So I'd like you to complete the chart with the objective. So I've labeled that here, the lesson objective, the activities you're planning on doing, and what kind of assessments you want to use. So maybe that's a formative assessment, or maybe you're going to give a quiz or some kind of Kahoot, whatever it is you're planning on using, and that may not be for every day. So I don't expect you to have an assessment for every day, although a formative assessment here in this column for every day would be awesome, but I'd like you to at least think about how are you going to assess learning. So I will review each of these charts when they're turned into me, and hopefully the goal is to adjust the curriculum resources based on what your students need. So instead of saying everyone has to review fiction this week, well, if your students are already pretty comfortable with fiction and you feel good about that, then maybe you want to study poetry instead for that week, or maybe you want to work on connecting different literary genres. So just keep that in mind. It really needs to be designed by you. I need to provide the resources. You need to design the lesson on how you want it to look for your students. So let me just give you a quick example. I'm just going to pretend that my students are really struggling with poetry. I only spent a couple weeks on it. I feel like they're not really thinking at that deeper level and able to get kind of those thematic ideas and that figurative language analysis that I need them to get out of reading a poem. So I'm going to look at my TEKS here, and if we want to get really specific, that's 6.4a, which is explain how figurative language contributes to the meaning of a poem. Or, in other words, I want them to be able to analyze a poem, right? That's really my main goal. So here, I'm not so concerned that you always know the number of the TEK, because I know we have a lot of them, but what do you want students to really know how to do? I want them to be able to analyze a poem. Okay, that's really my goal. So what are students going to do to practice? Like, what will it look like? Well, I know on one of the CBAs that one of the campuses gave, you had a poem called The Storyteller, and I really like that poem, and I think it's great for teaching this idea of analyzing figurative language. So I'm actually going to go back and revisit that poem. So I'm going to use I'm going to say read and analyze. Whoops, if I could spell analyze. Analyze The Storyteller. Okay. Now, what do I mean by analyze the storyteller? Well, maybe I'm going to do a guided reading with them, and maybe we're going to do some annotation, okay? Or maybe I want to use a TP cast chart, okay, where that goes through all of the different parts of the poem. Or maybe I want to have students work in groups to answer specific questions about the poem. Okay, so maybe I'm going to do that. Well, if I'm going to do that, that's great, but I think I'm probably going to read it with them first. So I think we'll do a guided reading first. I don't think mine really need the TP cast chart. I think we'll just do, I changed my mind. So we're going to do a guided reading with some annotation and some discussion. So I'm going to say discussion here. And then I'm going to have them work in groups to answer a specific question about the poem. So I think I'm going to change that to just one question. Answer a specific question, because I've already got one ready. How about that? So I'm going to give them a sentence stem, and I'm going to ask them the speaker's attitude toward the tree can be described as blank. And then I really would like to know how they know that. So I'm going to ask them to include some text evidence. So I want them to give me a quote here. And we'll walk through this question to make sure they understand it. But I think I want them to answer that question in groups and then maybe present it to the class. Go around and share. So then I'm going to have some student presentations. Okay? And we're going to spend the whole period really digging into this one poem, reading it, annotating it, talking about it, and then I'm going to give them this question in groups. So even though I'm letting them work in groups, I have a very specific question I want them to answer. Okay? And then once we get to the end of class, I really want them to take what we learned through our guided reading and tell me about this idea. I want to see if they can really analyze the figurative language in that poem that we've been talking about. So I'm going to ask them an open-ended question. I'm going to say, what does the poet suggest about, whoops, I'm so sorry I cannot spell today, the tree in lines 24 through 30. Okay, and I'm not going to make them provide evidence here, but I just want to know, what do they think the poet suggests about the tree? Because I want to know, through all this language, describing the tree is almost like a person. There's lots of personification in this poem. How does the author describe the tree? Like, what is really that deeper feeling the poet has about the tree? So I want them to think about that. And that's going to kind of be my formative assessment, or like my exit ticket. And I want them to submit that to me either using, they could use Padlet, they could use a sticky note, doesn't matter, but I want them to write their response somewhere where I can collect those and see if they really got that. Because if they didn't, tomorrow I probably need to go back and discuss a little bit more the use of personification in that poem, because maybe they're not quite making that connection. So I can use this to kind of plan if I need to adjust this next day. Okay? So that's kind of the goal for today, is to go through and really think about what you want to do. We don't have to cover 12 different texts. If we need to spend 2 or 3 days on the storyteller so that they can really analyze a poem, then we need to do that. And once I go through this process with them, then I probably do want to give them an assessment, like an actual, here's some multiple choice over a poem, or here's a poem with some questions that I want you to complete independently. That would be great after, I give them several days of instruction. So just keep that in mind. This is kind of what I would like it to look like in terms of what I'd like to see for activities. I don't want to see, here's what I don't want to see. Let me show you really quick. Read a poem. Okay, so I'm going to do 6.4, read a poem. Okay, my assessment will be to ask a question. Okay, there really isn't much design going on here, so we don't want that. Okay, let's just delete that. Gone. Okay, so I want you to think about, and this is why you want to collaborate with your team. Hey, mine are struggling with poetry. Could you find a poem and come up with some questions, and then I'll find an expository text and come up with some questions? Notice I'm only asking 2 questions. Now that doesn't mean more questions aren't going to come up in our discussion, but I'm only asking 2. Students are only having to respond to 2. I didn't give them 20 questions, just 2 good pre-planned questions that really will sound something like what they'll see on STAR, right? I asked about the author's attitude and something about the writer's craft. What does the poet suggest? So again, I'm using those STAR question stems, but I'm not just giving them a multiple choice question. I really want to see if they understand. So this is what I'm looking for. You have all afternoon to complete it. If you don't get all the way through, that's okay, but finish as much as you can, because then I'd like to follow up with you to see what you need moving forward. So have a great afternoon, and I will see you later.